Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Lewis Hamilton battling Sergio Perez on and off the track at the moment with some fiery words the way of the Mexican driver, suggesting that Max Verstappen would not be having as easy a time as he is if Hamilton was in the Red Bull in Perez's place. Is he correct? Probably yes, and there's some other drivers that I'm sure would say the same, but it's not exactly the statement you might expect Hamilton to come out with after a tricky weekend. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. So Hamilton's been making the points on Max Verstappen's ease of victory as of late, talking about how he's having a smoke and a pancake at the front of the field, a reference to a 2002, I believe, Austin Powers movie. And I mean, look, the dominance of the RB19 is unquestionable in the current state of Formula 1. It's similar in many senses to the W05. We can actually see the numbers here on the tracks that both cars have raced at, the average advantage over the field. Now, no doubt the Red Bull has been the dominant car of the season and might well go down as the greatest F1 car ever. Not necessarily the fastest, the W11 will still hold that crown, but relative to the competition, it's up there with the dominant Mercedes of the early part of the turbo hybrid era, and a lot of that advantage was engine related, not aero, which is the present advantage that Red Bull have. But you've also got to say that a lot of the advantages here the Mercedes had, this was the car at its maximum rate. The car was being pushed to the limit, at least by the drivers. Maybe they turned the engine out a bit, but the drivers were going flat out. Max Verstappen has admitted he's not necessarily pushing flat out because he doesn't need to, and this is what's making this season feel more underwhelming, and I'm sure Hamilton feels the same way, and we'll see why in a second, compared to when they had the dominant Mercedes of 2014 to 2016, in that kind of era before the cars changed a little bit, when there were battles at the front of the field. This is a race, Bahrain 2014, the duel in the desert, that is held in very high esteem. Great fight between Rosberg and Hamilton for the victory, and yes, they were pulling an immense gap on the cars behind them towards the end of this Grand Prix. But it was a great race. There were two great drivers, two world champions, of course, as it turned out, with Rosberg getting his in 2016, fighting for Grand Prix victories. And yes, Hamilton dominated this era, as did Mercedes, but there were more interesting fights at the front of the field. As it stands, ever since Miami, Verstappen just wins with basically no contest, right? Verstappen versus Perez in Miami was kind of the dagger, I would say. Verstappen coming from P9 to take a comfortable victory. Ever since then, Perez hasn't got close. He's pushed hard in qualifying, he's overstepped the mark, fell out early on in qualifying multiple times, and Verstappen is just easing to victory and even admits himself that he's not even pushing to the limit of this current car. It's clear that Perez is a good driver, a solid driver of a decent car. When you put him in a car that's set up in the way that the Red Bull is, that, it really requires it to be pushed on the limit to maximize it, Perez isn't, I think, the best in those circumstances, with the exception of some street circuits where he's typically very good. Verstappen has dominated in this season, on average finishing 11.5 seconds ahead of Perez, and Verstappen's going to win the championship, no questions. But many would wonder, what would the situation be like if we had another Mercedes era where it was Hamilton-Rosberg, they were both in the car, and the championship was, with the exception of 2015, very much in the balance. And in fact, the points gap that Verstappen currently has over Perez going into the summer break is the biggest since 2012, and that's Alonso Massa with 139. So technically, Gasly did better than Perez, but in 2019 they were further down the order, and therefore there were less points on display. So, you can look at it either way, but still, this hasn't been a great season for Perez. And you look at the overall numbers compared to the dominance of the car, and this is the halfway point of the season of Verstappen has this lead over Perez. It's not looking pretty. What would this look like if there was another driver in Perez's place? And honestly, I think all of the top drivers on the grid are pretty much represented here somewhere. Alonso, Hamilton, Leclerc, Russell, and I would say Norris are probably my top 5 outside of course, Max Verstappen, who's dominating everything. And this is a quote from Lewis that flew under the radar a bit after the weekend. This was only getting circulated last night, and I'm kind of surprised people didn't pick up on it sooner. And people were saying this is AI generated, but I really don't think that's the case. Anyway, I'll share about 11 seconds of this.
Do I want to be as fast as him? Of course. Would I like to have a car that's as fast as him? Of course. If I knew if I was in Sergio's car, it would be alright. Max would not be having the same time he's having now.
So Hamilton is very straight up here, right? What he's trying to say is very clearly indicated that if he was in the Red Bull, the season would be very different. He doesn't say that he would necessarily dominate Verstappen or win the championship in that car, but he would give Max a closer run. And I don't think there's any real debate about this. If there's any drivers on the grid that would give Max a good run, Hamilton would probably be the pick of the bunch. Then you're looking at Alonso, Leclerc, Leclerc, Norris, Russell, these type of drivers. People might throw Albon into the mix as well. But I think over the course of a season, over racecraft and qualifying and everything, Hamilton might be the best driver to actually give Max a run for his money in that car. Now, fundamentally, it's not going to happen, right? Unless Hamilton is saying this with the intention of actually, putting in a request to Mr. Helmut Marko to actually put him in that car next season. But we believe the contract is going to get signed with Mercedes relatively soon. But it's quite the shot at Perez, is it not? Saying that, yeah, I'd love to have a car as fast as Max. If I were in Sergio's car, Max wouldn't be having the same good time that he is at the moment. Saying that, he reckons that he'd certainly be beating Max in more races than Sergio currently is. And it's quite a thing to say given the circumstances, right? Perez struggling a fair bit this season relative to Max, as all of Max's teammates do, and that's probably partly car related, probably just how good Max Verstappen is. But yeah, especially given the fact that Perez and Hamilton came together throughout the weekends on track, to now say that, yeah, this Perez guy isn't very good, is he? Because put me in the car and we'll see a very different conclusion potentially to the season. The ideal season for many F1 fans is at least two teams going at it right to the front, as we got with Hamilton and Verstappen back in 2021, when there were two cars that over the course of the season were relatively well matched. The Red Bull was clearly faster at the start, the Mercedes was clearly faster at the ends. I think Adrian Newey admitted after the season that on the balance, they had the faster car, the Red Bull, but at the end, obviously the Mercedes, since their upgrade and the new engine they put in the car, was pretty mega over those last few races. But it was a great battle all the way down to the wire. But if we don't get a battle between two teams, people really want a battle between teammates, right? And if the Mercedes was the dominant force this season, it'd have been a pretty good battle, I think, between Hamilton and Russell. Hamilton's kind of dominating that intra-team battle so far this year, but it would be closer than it is with Verstappen Perez, absolutely. Question for you guys, though, could anyone in that sister Red Bull actually compete with Verstappen? Because one thing that I don't think the drivers of these dominant cars get enough credit for is how they push forward the development of their car. People say, oh, Schumacher had all the great Ferraris, and they say, oh, well, Hamilton had the best car for 7 years or whatever, and that's why he won everything, which is true. You need a great car to win, there's no doubt. But Hamilton and Schumacher before him and Verstappen to this day, it's not just the team that builds the car. Hamilton and the other lead drivers of those relative teams I've discussed over time give feedback to the team. They say what they would like to see, what direction they need to go in, and of course you've got to have a great team to execute on that. But it's no coincidence that the Mercedes was the best car 7 years in a row and Hamilton was giving feedback to the team. It's a two-way street to some extent. And therefore, my opinion is that if in 2021 Bottas was gone and Verstappen was in the Mercedes, I think Hamilton wins between the two of them. If it was Perez gone and Hamilton was in the Red Bull, I think Verstappen wins. The drivers were so in tune with the car that they had helped design over the previous years that I think they would have had the advantage over the other one. So it's really difficult for me to imagine a world in which someone else can step into the sister Red Bull and actually beat Verstappen over the course of a season. If it was, if there was a different car, then maybe, like, let's say they both had to sit in the Ferrari, and that was the dominant car of the season, then I think we'd have a really interesting battle. But if there's any drivers on the grid that could beat Verstappen in the same car, Hamilton, Alonso, probably Leclerc could beat him in qualifying. I'm not sure I believe he could beat him over the course of a season. And then I've mentioned Norris and Russell as potential other candidates. But yeah, to me, it's probably Hamilton, Alonso that could actually give him a good go. But however much we discuss this and whatever Hamilton might say to the media and to talk a bit of trash on Sergio Perez, frankly, it's probably not going to happen, is it? Especially when there are rumours today that Leclerc is going to re-sign with Ferrari. This is coming out, I think, of the Italian press, so say what you will about that. But it's meant to be a 2+3 year contract, so 2 years guaranteed, and then a big potential extension deal going on further on than that. And this would commit Leclerc with Ferrari for quite a long time to come. The quote always comes back to me, right? I think, was it Vettel who wrote on Leclerc's helmet something like, don't waste your chance or don't squander, something like that anyway, which kind of implied maybe get out of Ferrari if you feel like it's necessary. But still, Leclerc wants to win with Ferrari. Ferrari's primary goal right now is to keep Leclerc around. And you can understand why that's the case. Apparently, Sainz has asked for the same contract extension, but they're not so keen on doing that right now, and negotiations are ongoing. And there's also discussions that potentially Sainz to Alpine, or, maybe Sainz to Audi has been talked about, right, as a possibility over there. But yeah, Leclerc might be signing an extension with Ferrari. And it's funny because many Leclerc fans have said, this poor guy, get him out of Ferrari. But now he's going to sign the extension. They're like, oh, let's go. Leclerc, the Tifosi are going to reunite for longer. So yeah, hopefully Leclerc can win with Ferrari, but I'm just not convinced it's going to happen. As I said yesterday, for the last 14 years of Formula One, the only teams that have won Drivers' or Constructors' Championships are Red Bull and Mercedes. It's been since 2009 since anybody else won anything. So it's semi-tough to believe that it's going to happen in the near future. And it's the same with Norris in some sense. Yes, McLaren have made progress, but I have a very hard time believing that McLaren can actually win anything while they remain a customer team. They're not going to be a works team in 2026 like Aston Martin are with Honda. They're still going to be a Mercedes customer McLaren, which makes it very hard for me to believe that they can win anything. So I think that Norris has got to consider his options as well. Leclerc wants to stay with Ferrari apparently, and apparently that's going to be done. And Red Bull don't want to cause a rivalry with Max. And you get it, right? It's what Mercedes did with Bottas. It's what Red Bull have done over the last few years. They don't really want to put a driver with Max who is going to potentially cause friction and challenge them, because imagine that you had Verstappen and Hamilton in the same team. It's very likely there would be crashes. There would be incidents into turn one, and somebody else might win the championship because they'd be taking each other out every race, which isn't what Red Bull want. It's not what Mercedes wanted ever since Rosberg retired. And, you know, you can understand why Red Bull do this. But nonetheless, it would be fun if that was to be the case. So these are only early, silly season Rostermania rumour mills at the moment. But Ferrari do tweet this out, kind of saying, oh, Leclerc, you know, with the trophy and all this. So maybe there's something in that. Just a couple of other rumours to close out the video with. There has been some talks of Red Bull legend Sebastian Vettel joining, well, just Formula One legend in general, really, joining Formula E with a team called ABT. I believe they're a German team. So maybe there's something in that. And their boss has recently dropped hints that he lives in Switzerland, has done a lot of work for sustainability. Could you see Vettel returning to a motorsport that isn't Formula One? It seems a bit strange. If you, like, okay, maybe it makes sense, right? He loves his sustainability, loves his climate and all this stuff. So, you know, I guess it makes sense. It's a partnership, maybe match made in heaven in some respect, Vettel to Formula E. But for him to go and drive in Formula E feels a little bit strange. I'm not sure I would predict that to be the case, but maybe he will. The drivers that are going to Formula E are more the likes of the Felipe Drugovich, who apparently is in conversation to join Andretti's Formula E project for 2024. Not sure I buy that Vettel's going to go there, but that's been a rumour of the day, so I thought it was at least worth mentioning. But very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.